The Disrupt Education vlog can be found on YouTube. To hear it in podcast form, search Disrupt Education on any of the following podcast platforms: Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Castbox, Overcast, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, Spotify, or Stitcher. Welcome to this episode of Disrupt Education. My guest today is the host of the State of Ed podcast and also the author of Forward Fast, Making Sense of Education in an Era of Rapid Change. Marc Isseks is here, who's also the assistant principal of New Hyde Park Memorial High School in New York. Thank you for being with us, Marc.
Thank you so much for having me, Peter. I'm really excited to be on with you.
Awesome. So you have your brand is the Educational Pyromaniac. Is that what? Am I saying that right? Yes.
Yes, it is.
Tell us a little bit about that brand and what is your main message, and then we'll get into the book and the podcast.
Sure. The main message behind the Educational Pyromaniac or EduPyro is that I'd like to set fires or light fires under people who work and set fire to conventional systems that do not work. And there are a lot of both in education. And so I feel like the people who are doing the right thing need support and encouragement, and I want to be there to kind of fuel those fires. And there's a lot of stuff that doesn't work, and it has to go because it's impeding forward progress in making the strides that we need to make in our educational system in this nation. So, and even globally. So I'd like to be at the forefront of those kinds of changes.
Excellent. So let's jump into the book. Forward Fast, it is on my short list of reading. I will be honest, I have not read it yet, but once I found out about it, I'm ordering this sucker. It's making sense of education in an era of rapid change, which myself, I'm 19 years in, totally see how there are outdated pieces and then there's pieces that are starting to evolve. Can you talk a little bit about maybe an overview of what the book is and how you got to writing it? What was that like?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So like you, I've been an educator for a while. This is my 25th year in education, and I've started as a teacher, and then I worked my way up through the administrative ranks as a chairperson, a coordinator, and now a building administrator. And in that period of time when I started, there were no computers in my classroom. And then I got one computer in the back of the room. That was the beginning. And then I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? I have 37 kids in my classroom and one computer. And then, so they solved that problem by giving me 4 computers. The math still didn't work. So, and of course they weren't hooked up to the internet. So, and not that there was much of an internet back in the mid to late 90s to go on. But so in the course of my career and your career as well, we've seen this massive transformation in education and how technology has just intruded. And I wanted to capture some of that in the book and not just retell the tale of what had happened or what has happened, but what is currently happening and where we could and should be going, given the fact that we have this powerful technology. And that's a difficult conversation because it's so complicated. There are lots of people who are wonderful who don't want to make change or don't want to embrace change. It doesn't make them bad educators. Some of these people are some of the finest educators that we have. So we have to make sure that there's a seat at the table for them. So we can't just all jump on the technology train and take off for 2 reasons. One, because we abandon those great people. And 2, because we don't even know where we're going. So we're going to go full speed, but we don't necessarily know where that direction is. So that's kind of where I start the book. Call it a chapter called Tech Graveyards, which is basically how we do this, where we find this technological solution, this miracle, and we all buy in. We purchase, fire up the purchase racks.
You're right.
Load up the school with whatever that thing is, and then 18 months later, all those different things are sitting in a basement somewhere, collecting dust because we're on to the next thing. So part of what I wanted to do with this book is try to chart a course for the future in creating a tech mindset more than necessarily just relying on or talking about promoting a particular piece of technology.
Mm-hmm. What have you seen as a change in the actual student as well as technology? I know technology is actually changing. I know my kids, and we talked a little bit about before we recorded here about our children, totally different growing up than the way I did, and I'm guessing you. What kind of changes have you seen in students, especially as we're both high school educators?
Well,
I know that's a loaded question. So.
yeah, no, it's seismic. It's completely different. I thank God every day that I didn't grow up with cell phones and social media, because I don't know. I just didn't have that mentality where I wanted to be in a fishbowl and wanted everything that I did, aired for the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's too much. It's too much pressure. It's too much. It's too many prying eyes. It's too many big mouths with opinions and nothing to back them.
Mm-hmm.
It's too much. It's too much. Kids are chasing likes and followers, and that's just incredibly unhealthy for a developing mind. So that's problem number one. But the real shift is how we all, not just kids and adults, have all changed how we learn. The example I use in the book, is I wanted to change my engine oil filter, and actually the dealer was kind enough to offer to change it for me for like $200 or something like that. So while I was in the waiting room at the dealership while my car was getting an oil change, I just Googled how to change my engine oil filter, and I went on Amazon, ordered the parts for like $12, and it was at my house 24 hours later. And I went on Google. I found a 2-minute video, walked me through how to change the filter, change both the filters, and it cost me maybe $30 instead of 200 and change. So that was just a very short example of how we all have changed how we learn. We don't look at the manual anymore to see how to fix the dishwasher or to repair anything. We go right onto Google and we watch a video. Even if the first hit is a PDF, we skip the first hit and we look for where the video is. And sometimes we don't even wait, just click on the video, have it brought up as videos, and you just abandon text altogether. So we can't ignore the fact that this seismic shift has occurred in how people learn. And the hard news to deliver to educators today, but I'm trying softly to deliver it, is that kids do not need us for our content knowledge anymore.
Right.
They just don't. I know that you spent a lot of time gaining that, gaining that knowledge and becoming proficient in your field, especially on the high school level. And but they don't need you for that. But they need you more than ever, just not for just pure content delivery. So people who have designed their educational philosophy around just delivering content. I am a science teacher. I am a social studies teacher. They're the ones that are going to get hit the hardest and the earliest.
Right.
Kids don't need them for that, which is why a lot of them tune out in class, because as soon as they notice or pick up on the fact that this is just content delivery, they know that they can get that content anywhere they want, anytime they want. They don't need to be paying attention in class. And that is disruptive in a number of ways. So those are some of the surface changes that I've seen.
What do you think teachers should be learning now coming out? Because you and I, when I went through anyway, especially my undergrad, was classroom management and make sure they're listening to you, right? That's obviously changed, and I agree with everything you just said about where the content comes from. I'm not the holder of knowledge anymore. What do you think are the roles of teachers? And you and I can talk more about the secondary level or anywhere. But yeah, what does that role look like now? What should we be teaching teachers to get ready for, to prepare for in a post or secondary or even a primary level?
I think that there are 4 cornerstones of 21st century education. And I break them into 2 categories, inputs and outputs. So the input side is motivation and engagement. I think we need to teach teachers. It's always been important, but it's more important now than ever, to motivate your students and keep them engaged. And that means you have to go beyond just the content. If you look at your scope and sequence and you see, well, today I have to teach the American Revolution. Okay, well, Whereas in the past, you used to say, well, what are the facts that I need to get across? Who are the important individuals that I need to get across, and just have them know those things? You have to go deeper, and you have to find a way to motivate that and to make it engaging, and have students understand the parallels. So in order to do that, you really need to identify, like, where's the conflict, where's the drama, where's the human interest, what are the appeals that are going to bring your kids and keep your kids in. So that's on the input side. And then on the output side of the four cornerstones, you need to figure out a way to have students create and innovate. So how do you demonstrate your understanding of what you've just learned? And then and by doing that, and this is where technology is so powerful, it gives you tools, it gives students tools to express and demonstrate their understanding in ways that they can never do it prior to having the technology in their hands. And I'd watched an interview with the creator of The Simpsons, and he basically said when they're in the writer's room, how they delineate what stories will make it onto the air and what stories will get cut is, well, our environment here is animation. So if a story could take place in a non-animated world, then why bother doing it on this show? If it can only take place on this show, then that's what we want. Those are the stories we want to tell. So same thing with technology. If it's something that can be done without technology, well, then don't use technology for it.
Right.
Like notes. You don't need a $500 device to transfer notes from your iPad to a student's iPad, or from your Chromebook to a student's Chromebook. But if there's something about the technology that will allow students to go to another level, well, that's where you need the technology. And those so in terms of training teachers, we need to train them to see those different things and to look at lessons and lesson planning through those kinds of lenses, and not just, where's my curriculum guide? What do I teach on Monday? What do I teach on Tuesday? When do I test? What do I do with the test data? Those days are over.
That's a big challenge, I think, to change mindset of parents. I'm sure you've run into that. What other things outside of a diploma and a GPA and possibly a couple of test scores do you think a high school student should graduate high school with? What kind of skill sets do you think they need right now in this ever-changing world?
It's interesting that you bring that up. So in the book, I outline a curriculum that I've designed and I continue to work on, because it's like everything else, as Thomas Friedman says, you always have to be in beta today. You're never done. And it's called the Internet Ethics Curriculum. And the idea is, I feel like this is the most important thing that we're not teaching in schools right now. And it's a huge miss on our part, and we need to change it immediately. We are including courses and adding courses in engineering and in coding and in computer science, and that's all wonderful, but most of our kids will not necessarily be in professions that involve coding and engineering and computer science. There are still a whole host of other jobs that they'll have, assuming they can find a job in the 21st century economy when they graduate. But the thing that will impact every single one of them is that they will live in a world with phones. They will live in a world with an internet. They will live in a world with social media. And we are not requiring students to take these kinds of courses where they can learn about how to navigate the world of social media, how to understand the validity of the sources that you get in a Google search when 1 million hits come up, and you never go past page 3. Usually you don't get past the first page, but I'm sure
that's how we get good SEOs.
Yeah, exactly. Google knows all those statistics. Yeah. For sure. So we need to be preparing students to live in a world with technology, and not just to have jobs in a technological economy. And there's a difference. And so I think on all levels, from pre-K up through university, they have to be trained to think this way. And that goes back to sort of the shifting of mindsets that we were talking about earlier.
On what is your thoughts on post-secondary ed, the college, push? I know, I went to college, you went to college, you have a daughter in college. How do you think that's going to change in the next maybe decade, since we're right here in 2020?
It's funny that you asked that question, because if you look politically speaking, not that I want to go into politics, but this is a big this is a big point for a number of politicians where they want to provide free college education. This is actually something I've debated with my co-host Nick Simone on the podcast in episodes past, whether or not it's a good thing to give away college, so to speak, or to have to pay through the nose for college. I go back and forth on this. Also with the understanding that college is not necessarily for everyone. I don't want to have college turned into what high school was for students that generations ago, which is was sort of a requirement, and then from there you can have your whatever you want to call it, your middle class blue collar life. I don't want to define it that way. So I don't know, you're asking a really difficult question. I do go back and forth on this a lot, but I know that the debt that students are incurring is crippling, and that's problematic. So whether or not they're acquiring the skills that they need to be marketable or valuable in the economy, regardless of whether they are or whether they aren't, and I don't necessarily think that universities are setting the world on fire in terms of inspiring kids. But that's not necessarily the answer to your question. It's the debt that students incur and how it sets them back for a decade or 2 decades, and that's a really difficult pill to swallow. And I say that knowing that I have to pay my daughter's tuition bill as soon as I get off with you. But the numbers are staggering.
It's interesting. I've done a little bit of research on some, I would call them apprenticeships, and a lot of different evolving. A lot of them come through technology, like Holberton School, Lambda School. These are more on the coding side, but now they're starting to get into business analytics, and they're starting to pull from different places. And I just was wondering if you have seen any of those pop up in your area on the East Coast, New York. I know that WeWork has tapped into a little bit of that. What kind of other things have you seen, or are your students kind of changing to? Because it was always college for us. It was like, okay, you're either going to go into a trade, you're going to go into college or military, but I feel like there's this other area out there. Have you seen any of that, or?
A little bit. We're starting to see more and more of it, but if you really stop to think, in a disrupted world in which we live, where the rules have completely been set on their ear, the most successful people, the most innovative people, the people who are changing the planet are not the ones who are going through the traditional arc of education. You look no further than the founders of Facebook, Google. Throw a dart at Silicon Valley, you're going to find people who are college dropouts, but they're brilliant. So what I think the answer is if you have an education system that is not tapping into the talents and the brilliance and the potential of its students are now more than ever have the ability to leave that system and create something that can compete with the largest corporations in the world, all through the power of technology. And they can leverage those tools to be as strong and as powerful as the largest, big box companies. So, or blue chip companies rather. So I think because of technology, students now have other alternatives. And if we're not going to, or if universities are not going to help inspire and support that kind of innovation and individuality, and just expect people to be carbon copies of one another. And graduation is sort of a really great visual representation or metaphor of that, where everybody literally looks exactly alike.
Right.
Because they've come out of and been churned out of a system that's sort of designed along the lines of the industrial model. And Ken Robinson does a whole great TED talk on that.
Yeah.
So I think that if we're on the secondary level, or if on the post-secondary level, schools aren't going to meet those students' needs and tap into and allow them to make meaning and be individuals and demonstrate their talents, they're going to check out, and it's hard to blame them. I think it was Jamie Cassip said, today, if you're a young person and you want a job, then you just make your job, create your job. That is a far cry from what you and I were told when we were 17 years old, where we had we had to fit into a particular system that was already in existence. Now you can create your own corner of the world, and that's a power that we've yet to see the full potential of.
If you have, well, you do have a 16-year-old, I believe, and I have a 14-year-old. What advice would you tell a high school student coming into high school right now? Like what would be one or two things that you would kind of hint on, say, hey, this is something that you should probably focus on? Developing
your own voice. I think the more I see the world, and the more the world becomes, the more I become aware of the world, I should say. Mm-hmm. The more I see that the truly successful people on all levels have all found their voice, and they express themselves through that voice. Mm-hmm. And that is what I would tell mm-hmm. students, young people, instead of necessarily focusing on reading some other work and analyzing that voice. That's important, but mm-hmm. do that with the understanding that you're doing that so you can find your own voice, and not just simply for the pure exercise of being able to write an essay on a Regents exam or a state test, but for the purpose of understanding what voice sounds like, and then go ahead and try to find your own. I think that's the important extra piece or twist that we have to add.
We have a major teacher shortage coming, and how do we change that? How do we recruit more educators who are, just vibrant motivators, people of this new era? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we need to do better PR for education, because we get abused as a collective group. If you remember back to before 2008, when the economy tanked, educators were mocked because of our paltry salaries, and right. We were kind of wasting our talent and all that education, master's degrees and whatnot. Then the economy turned around, and then we were villainized for being like the fat cat pensioners, mm-hmm. Robbing the economy of its wealth. It is just so we need better PR for education. Frankly, every time you turn on TV, there's another teachers union on strike somewhere, fighting for wages, fighting for benefits, and we're not selling ourselves well, mm-hmm. And we're not selling the brand well. So I think we need to find a better way to do that, to entice young people to want to get into this business. I'm a third generation educator. I never even knew that I had a choice to do something else, to be honest with you. And my grandparents, my parents, and now myself, my wife, my sisters in education. So that's just how my family was. But mm-hmm. I feel like we need to not stigmatize, not villainize teachers. Instead, we need to be supportive of teachers, and we need better PR. And frankly, I think, not that I want to necessarily open up this Pandora's box, but one of the things that I write about in the book is that tenure is while it has its benefits, mm-hmm. is one of the greatest problems that's facing education. And when we're doing it to ourselves, because we have a handful of people who are just embedded in the system and cannot come out because they have diplomatic immunity, mm-hmm. It takes down the work that everybody does, and it lowers it. And that's unfair to the people who are doing great work, and that's unfair to the great leaders out there, and that's unfair to the great educators out there who are working in classrooms. So that's part of the PR problem, is that when people want to criticize teachers, they can point to that one person who's in pretty much every faculty, who is just entrenched and isn't going anywhere. But they're also not doing anything.
Right.
If anything, they're creating negative growth in the school, having a negative effect in the school, and everybody knows it. Okay. And that becomes a major PR nightmare also. So we have to be fair too. That part of the problem is the very small handful of teachers and leaders who are stuck in the system and doing a lot of damage, and still have years to go before they're out.
That sounds like a great discussion on the State of Ed podcast, which is your podcast, and that's found across pretty much all podcasting areas. The book is Forward Fast, Making Sense of Education in an Era of Rapid Change, which, man, we are in it. Where can people find the book? Is it on Amazon and everywhere?
Everywhere, yeah, everywhere. Amazon and any online, Goodreads, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, you name it.
And how about you online? Where can people find you online, Marc?
Sure. So on Twitter, I'm at Marc Isseks, MarCisseks, and then you could also find me online, marcisseks.com, and also stateofedpodcast.com.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Some great insight. I'm actually going to have my son listen to your advice because I give him that advice, but it's like the coaching model. You tell the coach to tell them, hey, can you tell my kid this? But excellent advice. The book is out there again, Forward Fast, Making Sense of Education in an Era of Rapid Change. Thank you so much, Marc, for being on the podcast with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Peter. I appreciate it.
All right, until next time, ladies and gentlemen, we'll talk to you on Disrupt Education.